Hey everybody, welcome to the Novice Fisherman's Guide to the Florida Keys number 6, where we're going to talk about where to fish and where to find the fish. Now the Florida Keys are basically just a bunch of islands out in the middle of the ocean, and they're connected by bridges. So you'd assume, oh, you guys have access to tons of fishing spots. Well, you have to remember, just like the mainland, we still have the issue of a lot of private property where just the average person doesn't have access to even get to the water. And then those public areas that are open to the public, a lot of times they're shrouded with mango trees right along the bank, so you can actually get to the water. So finding a spot can be a little bit challenging. For that reason, I'm going to show you a site that I utilize to scout out areas just to see if it's a spot that I can get access to the water and be able to do some fishing if I find out that it looks like a good area. After that, I'll go into my board of knowledge, my wall of knowledge there, my dry erase board, and we'll go through 4 different factors that I utilize to gauge whether a patch of water is fishy or not so fishy. Okay, the website that I use for my scouting is Google Maps. I'm going to open that up. You can Google Maps, Yahoo Google Maps, whatever search engine, and you're just going to go to google.com/maps, and I'll bring up your maps for your area. This is the Key West, but what we're going to want to use is the satellite version that gives us real bird's eye view of areas. So we're here at Key West. For example, I wanted to take a look at this bridge right here to see if it's a fishable area. So what I could do is I could use the scroll there to zoom in. And I can keep zooming in. And that basically, I think, is about the farthest. Well, no, maybe one more zoom. Nope, that was it. Okay, so that's the lowest you can go from the satellite version, looking down. And I'm taking a look at the bridges and say, ooh, that looks kind of interesting with the rocks around there. You got this channel over here. That looks kind of interesting. It looks like a marina over here. Looks like there might be a walk down area over here, path to get here. Definitely a beach area here with some rock area there. So there's some parking. Looks like a hotel. So this looks like somewhat of a fishy bridge that might be worthwhile. Say we're looking at this beach area and wondering if, well, is that something accessible by foot or by bike or whatnot. So we can zoom down to floor level, and it's got a bike path. Yep, a standalone bike path there. We'll move over a little bit so we can get a better angle. And looks like we could just walk right down like a little park. We could walk right down to this rocky area and fish there. Don't see any no fishing, no trespassing signs. Got the bike path that's right there. Got some parking. Looks like at the hotel there. So looks like a decent spot. But that's exactly what you want to use this program for, is spotting a bunch of areas that look fishable. You could do a cursory check to make sure it's not posted, that you have access to the water. And then boom, add it to your list, and then you can have a scouting day and go check out all these different areas. So googles.com/maps, excellent option for doing some research prior to going out in order to find spots. Okay, welcome to my board of knowledge here. All right, so our 4 fishy factors for finding a good quality fishing spot. So this will help to kind of break down once we use the Google satellite to look at a bunch of areas. So when you're researching those, you can use these factors to determine which ones to prioritize and which other ones you can kind of like, maybe later. So the 4 factors, and these are in priority order, okay? So my importance that I look for. So we got 1 is current, 2 is structure, 3 is depth, and 4 is food. Okay, our number 1 priority is current. Okay, water flow. All right, what that does is it brings food. Okay, as that water moves across, okay, it'll pick up bits and pieces of everything. So it could be micronutrients that little microorganisms will feed on, and then little bigger fish will eat those microorganisms, and bigger fish in that food chain basically. As well as it'll pick up struggling bait and fish that aren't able to keep up in that current, and it pulls them off their home location, and they get flushed out in that current, and then all of a sudden you got all this stuff flowing down that current, and you have the fish that'll sit on the bottom looking up and wait for something they want, go up, grab it, eat it, and boom, they don't have to go in search of it, it comes to them. So food is a big factor. High tide equals access. What that means is basically because we have those tide swings, we have a high tide and a low tide. The water going from the Gulf of Mexico, when it's full, is high tide, then it flushes out to the Atlantic side, which is at a low side, and it builds up, and then it teeter-totters, and then the Gulf is on a low tide. High tide equals access is basically after a low tide, when the water is very shallow, all the bigger fish will get off those flats because it's too dangerous. It won't basically hold them there. So they'll go find deeper water areas to kind of sit back and wait for that tide to get higher. So once that water starts rising again, they all come back out into those deeper water areas that were before low because there's more food there. That areas can't get picked apart all 24 hours a day because half the day they're too shallow, so they can't get fed on. So that tends to be more food in those areas. So that opens up more accessibility. Low tide equals confinement. On the flip side, when that water is really shallow like that and all those big fish have to move off, they have to go to somewhere where there's deeper water. So if you can find those spots that have those deeper cuts, like along the mangroves, the edges, any deeper pools, that's where those bigger fish are going to be hanging out during those low tides. So if you throw a bait in those pools, you got all the fish in that one little area, you're going to get smashed. And then we've got outgoing equals buffet. Basically all that means is that the way the Keys are is it's broken up in by US 1, and we have a north side and a south side. The north side is basically the Gulf of Mexico and considered the backcountry. Majority of that area is all flats, okay? It's really shallow water, a lot of grassy bottoms. We got all the mangrove tree islands that are out there that aren't inhabited, okay? And those tend to be breeding grounds for a lot of different species of tiny little bait fish to microorganisms to even the big ocean-going fish. They start out in those areas, grow up to a certain size because there's so much plentiful food there, and then they head off into the dark big blue ocean there. But because there's so much food in those flats areas there, on an outgoing tide where the water flows over those areas, it pulls all those little bait fish out of there, the weaker ones, the sick ones, the dead ones, or the ones that are ready to start heading out to the ocean. So you have all this type of bait just kind of flushing out of those areas and heading over to the Atlantic. So what you'll have is a lot of times is you'll have just on the edge of the Atlantic where it starts dropping off into deeper water, those fish will be sitting there and just waiting for that outgoing tide because they know it's just all full of bait fish to feed and consume. Versus the flip side, when you have a tide going from the Atlantic to the Gulf, you have open ocean that's been pretty much filtered. You don't have that big bait fish. You don't have all those microorganisms. It's not really in enriched areas like the flats are. So you have water incoming, but it doesn't tend to carry a lot of food. You still have a good, better than a dead calm because it's still moving stuff, and feed will move something, and then fish will feed on those. But generally the outgoing equals buffet time. Number 3 is depth, water depth. More depth, the better. As we had talked about earlier, low tide equals confinement. So if you can find a deeper edge, a deeper pool along a big flats, you'll remember all those fish that are normally up on that flats area, when it gets too shallow, they're going to move into that deeper area. So if you can find areas like that, you have those fish confined, and then they're easy targets. 2 is food. Pretty much the same reason there, but bait fish tend to kind of like getting in those areas that have a little bit more maneuverability so they can get away from stuff, versus being out on the flats where they can get chased by fish and they can't dive down, they can just swim away. Where in deeper water, at least they can kind of maneuver down and get away. And same thing with birds attacking them, okay? And this, I guess, correlates with safety, is that with the bait, okay, and they's on those flats, when birds come over, okay, have you ever seen a mullet school going and they see the shadow of a bird and they just freak out? Birds prey on fish all the time. They can see very clearly, dive bomb them, grab them, okay? So it pushes like the little bait fish into those deeper areas where they can hide. but also provides that safety for all the fish from birds, predators, and so forth. And then 4 is temps. Deeper water tends to be less volatile than shallower water just because of the sheer volume. During summertime especially, deeper water is preferred area because it stays cooler longer, where in the Keys here on the summer times, the water temps in the flats can be 90 plus degrees where it's like boiling, there's no oxygen. But if they'll go to a deeper cut that might be 5 foot, 10 foot, it's going to be considerably cooler and it's going to stay that temperature longer because it's deeper and more volume. Same on the flip side, like now during the winter time when it's cooler, okay, during the day once the sun comes up, those shallower areas are going to warm up faster, so you'll find more fish moving to those areas out of that colder water that's been sitting and chilling overnight and then going up on the flats where the sun is, and it's starting to warm up that water faster, so they'll move up and you'll find them there. So that part makes a difference. And number 4 is food. Basically, look for areas that's carrying food, bait fish. So when I look for areas and I see a pool that's holding a bunch of glass minnows, or I see a bunch of pilchards, or I see mullets swimming around in an area, okay? When you see food like that or you see bait fish like that, there's always going to be predators around them, because predators basically just, that's all they do is do is eat. So they'll just constantly stay around areas like that that hold a lot of bait fish. They might not be actively feeding like that, but they want to stay there and be around it. It's no difference like when I go out hunting for glass minnows or pilchards to cast net. I'm a lot of times looking in the trees when I'm bait hunting. You're like, what? Because pelicans will sit in the trees when they're not actively feeding. When they're dive bombing in the water and they're gobbling up, it's, yeah, you can say, oh, there's bait there. You just go there and you cast net and you catch them. But when the birds aren't active and you're not seeing anything busting on the waters, how do you tell? I go look in the trees. If I can see an area where the pelicans are just sitting in a certain area, that's where the bait is. They just might not be feeding it at that time, but they're always going to hang around where the food is. And it's no different from the fish. If you see a lot of bait activity in a certain area, somewhere around that perimeter, you're probably going to find some other bigger predatory fish. And the other part of it is the feeding. Use your other senses, look for bait getting busted, boils, listen to food splashes, fish splashes and gulping and jumping, okay? That just is that sign that, okay, that's where bait is and that's where the fish are feeding, and that could be an active area. So I hope you enjoyed the information from the board of knowledge there. Now what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go drive around the Keys, lower Keys here, Key West area here, and just kind of hit a few different areas and kind of integrate what those 4 factors in and show you a few different spots that and point out how those factors interact. Now I'm mainly going to be doing shore fishing stuff or shore spots because that's kind of majority of the people watching this type of video but will utilize. However, I do have just like the same type of information again on my YouTube channel, Key West Kayak Fishing, that goes into more details if you've got a kayak or a boat, and the same type of information on how to find spots more out in the water, as well as on fishing spots down here in the lower Keys, basically from Big Pine down to Key West. I show all my fishing spots and I'll tell you exactly where I'm going, so there's no secrets there, especially even my bait catching spots. But for this video, I'm going to drive around and just basically show you a few different spots, show you why I would fish these areas, why I think they would be good, how they interact with those major 4 different influencers there, and give you an idea of what to look for. So let's go check it out. All right, we're over here at the White Street Pier. It's actually closed down at the moment, which is surprising, but we've got the White Street Pier, we've got the water that passes under there, and then we've got the rock wall. Now, of our 4 categories, what this provides is structure, both the pier itself going out in the water, the rocks along the seawalls, the little bridge pilings, and as well as current. Both you can see in here, because that's the only way for the water to pass through, is through here. And on the outside, when the water hits if the current is going this way, it has to wrap around the corners and that looks for that current that we're talking about. This is farther along on the seawall, but this kind of forms a bit of a corner here. And this section here, as you can see, there's a pelican there, would be a bait spot where the current pushes around. Proves my point there. But the current pushes around, a lot of time the wind blowing, and it pushes the bait, and they get stuck in this corner over here because they don't know where to go, so they end up just schooling around here. So you get a lot of fish, the birds, and so forth just feeding on them. So definitely good bait spot equaling fish. Okay, we are here at the end of a little jetty. Jetties are always good. Okay, they stick out into the ocean. Plus, when they use these kind of rock formations, there's a lot of little nooks and crannies that the fish can hide in, so it's always an attractant. So that's kind of our structure. Then if you can kind of see as you watch the wind blowing the tide this way, that the water is getting pushed and then it runs it around that edge. And because of that, it forms a current right there around there. And I guarantee you that's where the bait is stacked up. There's a pelican hanging out there. But then fish will be waiting in this area for that food to come through this current and then just gobble them up. And then as you can see, there's different formations all the way down here to protect the beach, but all of those would be good. Okay, we are at one of the ideal places. Anytime you see these culverts, these pass-through pipes, this one actually goes from the Atlantic side bay there under the US 1 and comes out here. As you can see, it's pushing a ton of water with that current, so it'll go one way for a while, and then when the tide changes, it'll flow back the other way. So it's one of the few areas where the water is allowed to pass from the Gulf to the Atlantic. So in this spot, we've got, like we talked about, current. We've got structure because these pipes go through so they could hide in there. You have the mangrove trees lying there. We've got depth because it's cut out because of all that current, whereas out there it's maybe less than a foot. And we've got tons of food. Well, we got the fish as well. As you can see, there's tons of glass minnows. Below there, we've got the grunts, and then you can also see mangrove snappers popping in out of there. So it's got a bunch of everything. These are such an excellent spot to catch fish. And that brings us to the bridges. So bridges tend to mean current. As you can see here, this is the Cow Key Channel right along Key West, so it gets tons of water flow between the Atlantic and the Gulf and behind us. It's got depth because it's cut through here. It's a boater's channel, so it's dug out for that. Plus the current keeps it flushed out. You have structure because you have the base, all the pilings there. Plus a lot of these have the rubble from the old bridges. So they have all those bases down there. You can kind of see that structure there. And just because of that structure, you tend to get a lot of bait. So you get a lot of food through these. This is why you always see the guys fishing for tarpon along bridges. They're doing the same thing. The bait is there, so they sit there and they ambush food as it comes by. Bridges in general are the best in the Middle Keys, basically from Big Pine going east to Tavernier. The bridges that we have in the Key West, because we're surrounded by shallows, tend to be not very deep. And even if they have a bit of a cut right by the bridge's centers, once you get away from them, they go back to shallow. So the bigger species can't really exist underneath them. But it does fit all of our requirements, and that's why they're so popular for fishing down in the Keys. Most of these bridges have a built-up base underneath that you can walk down and go underneath the bridge. Those are generally good because you can cast to the center pilings if the channel by the edge is sort of deep. Sometimes they'll be very shallow and not worth it, but always worth a try. Plus you have the ability to get to shade, where during the summertime that's very important. Then we've got docks and pilings. Now these can be great places to fish. The main thing that you want to look for though is current. A lot of times you'll have residential docks that are dead ends and they don't have a lot of water flow, and it tends to get a little bit stagnant, you tend to not find that many fish in those areas there. But any of them that are open to the oceans, either the Gulf or the Atlantic side, or through to a channel where it's constantly pushing water back and forth, they'll generally be excellent places to fish. Depth comes into play as well. Deeper is a little bit better, but usually when you're by docks, they tend to be a little bit deeper so boats can anchor up to them. But always a good spot to try. Okay, so I hope that was a bit helpful in regards to kind of figuring out the lay of the land. This kind of brings up two very important factors. One is don't overthink it. Okay, if you have only access to one certain area because maybe you're renting a house, you have a dock and that's all there is, fish it. Don't worry about it. Okay, this more comes into play when you have choices for multiple locations, you're going out prospecting, and you have a 3, 4, 5, 6 places to choose from. This will help you to kind of put them in priority order so that'll kind of make your time management, because fishing takes time. The other important factor, which is almost the golden rule down here, is to remember that in regards to fish in the ocean, especially on an island like we have, there are no fences, okay? So just because I say, yeah, we want structure, we want current, we want food, we want depth, you can find a spot that is super shallow, has dead water, there's no life activity, okay? And you'll catch a fish of a lifetime, because fish don't listen to me. They go where they want to go. And I guarantee you people have caught big fish in just random areas. And again, those random areas could be those spots because they just don't look fishy, so nobody fishes them. So all the fish are still there, never been touched. They don't know what the hook is, and you have the time of your life. So just to kind of keep that in mind. So anyways, hopefully that was helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video. Bye.